Hey guys, just getting set up for the live stream. If you are on, say hi in the comments so that I know you're here. What is going on today? All right. I am just going to share this live stream into my Facebook group so that anyone in there can also follow along with us. So if you're just joining and you aren't familiar with what we're doing right now, this is the very first day of the Turn Your Idea into a Story challenge. So I'm running a free 5-day challenge, which is going to help you to take the idea that you've had in your head for so long and actually flesh it out, put the different information together so that you have not just an idea, but an actual story. And we're going through all of the most important pieces of craft to make sure that you can do this. Oh, I've got some weird lighting going on here. Hopefully that will disappear soon. Okay, so if you aren't part of the challenge right now and you want to be, you can go to jenniferblanchard.net/story challenge and sign up for the challenge. You'll get the emails every day for the 5 days and it will talk you through everything that we're doing. And then of course we're doing a live stream right here every single day for the 5 days so that you can get your questions answered, so that we can brainstorm with me, and just so we can talk a little more about concept. And I'm going to give you some examples. And each day we're going to go through the main topic for the day. And just, again, if you have questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer them for you. So welcome to the live stream. I'm going to get started in 1 second. I'm just going to share this over to my 1% Writers Club group. And that way anyone in there wants to join us, they can. If you are watching live and you want to say hi, just leave a comment below. Or if you have any questions about concept, put them in the comments because I'm happy to answer them for you. And I will do that as we go through the live stream. So please feel free to interact with me. I see some people on, so say hi if you want. Hi from Europe. Hi, Yvonne. How are you? Glad to have you join us for the challenge. All right. Just sharing this live stream over into my Facebook group, and then we're going to get started. Hey, Deborah. Welcome to the live stream, guys. Concept. All right. So we are talking concept today. So if anyone wants to, hey, Heather. If anyone wants to share, hi, Carol. How are you guys doing? Okay, so if anyone wants to share their concept in the comments to get some feedback, or if you have any questions about concept or anything related to that, put them in the comments because I'm happy to answer them for you and just give you some clarity, because I think, and this is why I always do concept as one of the very basic pieces of story, is that concept at a basic level is your foundation for your story. So if you can get your concept right, the rest of it becomes an extension of that concept, and it makes it much easier for you to, to work your story out. So now when you're starting out, you may not have a concept yet. So, hey, Rita, welcome to the live stream. Okay, so you may not have a concept yet. You may have an idea. So an idea, which I talked about in the email this morning, but just to sort of reiterate for anyone who hasn't gotten the emails, and if you're not on the emails for this challenge, you can get them by going to jenniferblanchard.net/story challenge and sign up for that. You'll get that delivered to your inbox every day, including the replays from all of this. Hi, Holly. So the whole thing with concept is that it's a very specific thing, just like premise is a very specific thing and all of that. Hey, Cynthia. So keeping that in mind, starting with an idea. Now, a lot of the times an idea comes to you, it's not a concept or it's not a plot. It's just sort of a blip of inspiration. So maybe a character idea or a couple of lines come to you from the actual story. Or like for me, when I was first starting out, ideas would come to me as sort of situations. So like a potential situation that could be going on in a story. And I think sometimes that still happens to me, is that it will come to me as a situation. Now, funnily enough, a situation could be a concept depending on what it is. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But with a concept, you're really taking this idea and you're honing it and you're really refining it more, which is exactly what we're going to be doing over the next 5 days. So today is really just a starting point. So the thing I would say is, if right now you're confused about concept, if you're not sure about your concept, if you just don't even know what the hell is happening and you're just like, I have this idea and I don't know what to do with it yet, don't worry, don't freak out, because this is just the beginning and it's totally normal for an idea to take time to develop and to, just sort of become a story. So at the same time that you're working on this, just keep in mind that it could change as we go through the next 5 days, and that's okay. So your idea is the starting point, but it's not always going to be exactly the thing you end up with at the end. So for me, that was one of the hardest things at first. You know, when I wrote my first story back in 2008, well, I had this situation in my mind about this girl who was going to drop everything and move across the country to try to date her favorite musician. That was like the situation that I had as an idea, and I thought that's a story. So I ran with it and I started writing it. So, 50,000, 60,000 words in, I was super excited because I finished, but then when I sent it to my editor and I had people looking at it, they were like, well, this isn't exactly a story, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be fixed in this. And so that was the first, like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing thing. So when I finally accepted that it was okay to not know what I was doing and to give myself permission to take time to learn this stuff, that's when everything really changed. So now I'm working on a story that's with my editor. It's a redo of that story that I wrote in 2008, but now it's an actual story as opposed to an idea, but not really a story. So really excited about that, and it's great to see just the development of it, because that's really what happens. The more you learn about craft and the more you take time to just understand it and practice it and study it, is that you start to get closer and closer every time you work on a story to actually having a good story. And so eventually you can go, man, this is great. I'm excited about this. This is a great story. But, when we're starting out, it maybe doesn't feel that way. So we feel like, well, I have this idea, but I'm not sure what to do with it. And so concept is going to be this thing that comes in to help build the foundation of your story. So as I mentioned in the email this morning, concept is really like the landscape of your story. So I like to think of it as the setting most of the time. Now, it's not always the setting, but I like to think of it as setting, or like the stage that your story unfolds on, because a concept is really just a platform. So it's not a story in itself. It's not even a plot in itself. It's just a stage where now a plot could be created on. And what's cool about concept is when you get it right, you actually can build multiple plots off of the same concept, which is what happens with a series, either a fictional series of a story series, or actually like a TV series, is that there's one concept that goes across the entire series, and then each episode has its own plot. And we're going to talk more about plot tomorrow, so get ready for that. But just to sort of go through the other things that concept can be, and here's the list. If you haven't read Story Engineering by Larry Brooks yet, and let me just see if I can grab it off my shelf here. Yes, okay. This is the best book ever to read if you want to learn more about the concepts and the ideas and all the stuff we're going to be talking about over the next 5 days. This is the book to read, because this is going to give you a breakdown of absolutely everything that I'm talking about, and while I'm going to talk about it probably in a slightly different way, he talks about the exact same way. And what I've learned, I completely learned from him over the years, and especially that he's one of my mentors and someone that I've worked with on my stories. And so I just believe that his version of storytelling is the best one, at least for me, because it was the one that gave me the most clarity and understanding about what it really takes to write a good story. So concept and premise was something that I learned from Larry, and something that I refined over the years of, once I learned about it, studying it, watching lots of movies, reading books, practicing on my own stories. So concept, like I said in the email, can be the landscape that your story unfolds on. It can be the stage, that it's the foundation for. It can be a setting. It could be a time or a place. It could be a speculative imagining. So like if you're making up a whole new world, if you're creating like a fictional world, that can be your concept. You can have a notion, which would be like a belief of some kind that basically becomes the foundation for your story. You could have a proposition, which is like a scheme or a plan that's going on. So some sort of a, some sort of a plan or something that's happening in the background that sort of becomes that landscape, and then now the rest of the story unfolds on. It could be a situation specifically. So I mentioned this character moving across the country to date this, musician that she's obsessed with. Well, that in itself is a concept, but it's not enough for a story. So that's why we have to bring in all these other elements, which we're going to be talking about over the next few days. Now, a concept could also be a character. So this is kind of cool if you're looking at, well, I want to do a series. A lot of the times if you're doing a series, your concept is going to be your character. Now, not always. Sometimes it's your actual setting. It's, if you're writing about a fictional world, if you've made up like a fantasy world, that could be your concept. But it could also be a character. So if you're thinking like Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, those are all characters as concept, because what's conceptual is the character. There's something about them that makes them different than everybody else, that makes them just completely out of the norm for what you would see in a story. So it becomes what's conceptual. So concept is just that thing that really brings something to the story that I always call the gotta read factor. So it's kind of like you hear this thing about the story and automatically you're like, I need to read that. Even if they've never told you the plot yet, they haven't told you who the characters are, it's literally just this one little blip and you go, I want to read that. So as an example, a story that I'm working on right now, which the concept is, and funnily I found another story which I'm going to tell you about that relates to the same thing. So the concept of the story that I'm working on, another one that I'm planning right now, is the breakup coach. So it's basically a person, like her character is concept. So she has this job where she helps people break up with their boyfriends and girlfriends. That's kind of her little thing that she does. So the concept is her character and sort of the job that she has. So that's what's conceptual. And then what's cool is that from that one thing, you can now create all these different plots. So recently on Netflix, I found a movie called The Matchbreaker, which has the exact same concept as the story that I'm working on, which is a guy who helps people break up with their significant others. That's the concept. But the plot is totally different. His version, my version, it's completely different. And so that's, for me, one of the best ways to understand concept is looking at it from that level of, well, if it's a concept, then it's interesting and it brings inherent conflict and tension to the story before there's even a plot, before we've got an antagonist, before we know what the journey is going to be in the story. We automatically have this thing that makes us go, I need to watch that or I need to read that. Now, of course, that's going to be based on your genre, so maybe that doesn't interest you. You think, I don't care about a breakup coach. But for somebody who reads that genre, watches movies in that genre, they're excited about that. They think it's a great concept. So like for me, when I found The Matchbreaker on Netflix, I got super excited because my first thought was, this is a concept that I've been working on, and here's another story where it's being done. And the great thing about concept is it can be done over and over again in a million different ways, and that's what makes it a concept versus an idea or a plot. So that, for me, just really helped me to see how I could take all of my stories that I've done over the years and really bring something to them that it's going to make it much more interesting and much more conflicted without even bringing in all the other pieces yet. So this is just one piece of the entire puzzle, but it's a really important piece. So if you've been working on a concept and you want to share it in the comments, I would love to see it, and I would love to just give you some feedback and talk about it. So if you're brave enough, feel free to do that, and I'm happy to do that with you, to go over some other concepts. So in case you haven't seen any of the movies I'm talking about, so let me just sort of go down and give you some additional concepts. So in the movie slash book, The Fault in Our Stars, the concept there is two dying teenagers fall in love. That's the concept. It's a situation. So these two people are dying and they're falling in love at the same time. That's the foundation of the story. However, it's not the plot of the story. So the important thing here to keep in mind is that this is a very important distinction. And it's so important that it could really change your writing career that much. Because what happens is most of the time, a writer gets an idea for a story. Oh, I'm going to write a story about two dying teenagers who fall in love. Boom, that's a great idea. Let me go and write that. So it's actually premature to write it from that place because that is not a story. That is just a concept. It's an idea. It's been moved into the concept phase, but it is not a plot. So what would happen if you took that and ran with it, which is what most writers do, like, oh, I got this great idea. I'm going to write about these two dying teenagers. They're going to fall in love. And that's the story, is we just see this love story play out of these two people who are dying and they're falling in love. Not a story. It's an episodic narrative. So big difference here is an episodic narrative is basically the day-to-day occurrences in a character's life. There's no true end point. It could continue on forever. Now, of course, if they die, I guess you could call that an end point. But technically, it's not an end point because an end point means there's a journey they've gone on specifically with a goal that they're trying to reach. And by reaching that goal, they've hit what they call the end. So without that, you don't have an actual story yet. And so it would have been a mistake for me to take this idea of a breakup coach and run with it, to just go, oh, I'm going to write a story about a breakup coach. And then what I would have done, what would have happened is that I would have ended up with an episodic narrative about a character who helps people break up with their significant others. Yeah, there's conflict. Yeah, there's tension. Yeah, there's drama, but there's no story because the story comes in with your plot, with actually having an antagonist and a goal and all of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow. So not to get into that too much today. Unfortunately, you kind of can't break it all apart. And I try to sort of break it apart and talk about it in little pieces. But you're going to hear me talk about the other concepts and pieces of craft at the same time because they all go together and they're all, puzzle pieces that are going to bring this idea that you have to life. So Concept being the very first part of it. Okay, let's see. We got some comments. Is concept related to the message you're trying to send, or is that theme? Yes, so your message is going to be your theme. That's going to be the theme of the story. A lot of the times your theme comes out of your actual character arc. So however your character is going to change in the story and the inner demon they're going to overcome, a lot of times that becomes your concept, or excuse me, your theme. So basically, this person's going to change from beginning to end, and whatever they're going to learn, that's going to be the message of the story. Now, that doesn't have to be the case, but a lot of times that is. So that would be your theme, not your concept. Concept. An older, out-of-work talent manager discovers the next sensation while on vacation in Miami. Okay, so that's a great starting point for a concept. So let's look at this one now. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so an older, out-of-work talent manager discovers the next sensation while on vacation in Miami. So this could potentially be a plot. So as you can sort of see, you're getting these pieces of, okay, now we have a character in place now. The talent manager discovers the next sensation while on vacation in Miami. So this is sort of like bringing in now a plot of a story. Now this isn't a whole plot yet, but it's definitely bringing in the plot. So what I would say here is, what's conceptual about this? Is it Miami? So is it the fact that they're in Miami on vacation? Is that what's conceptual about this story? Now, probably not, but that's a question to ask yourself, is what makes this, what you just wrote there, what makes it conceptual? So is it a situation specifically? Is it, just the landscape of it? Is it going to be Miami? Is it something about Miami and this person being there, maybe that's the place to find talent or something. So it's like the hot spot for talent, for new talent. So that becomes your concept then. That's a possibility. So I would just mess with all that. The other thing is looking at this out-of-work talent manager. Is there something about the talent manager that makes them conceptual as a character? So is there something about them that's special or different than everybody else? Maybe they have a superpower. Maybe they have, they have the super ability to look at somebody and know that they're a star immediately. Like, I don't know. I'm just making this stuff up now. But the idea here is, what can you bring to this idea that you have that's going to make it more conceptual? So really play with that, really come up with, and really look at the list that I gave you in the email. So again, if you're not getting the emails, jenniferblanchard.net/story challenge to get the emails, and just to sort of run the list down, and I have it here just to read it off. Concept can be landscape, stage, a setting. It can be a notion, a proposition, a time, a place, a situation, a speculative imagining, or a character. So what I like to do is take this, what you wrote here, so an older, out-of-work talent manager discovers the next sensation while on vacation in Miami, and look at all of these. Okay, what landscape could I bring to this? What setting could I bring to this? What notion could be in place? What situation could be happening? And look at all of these pieces and ask yourself, what could potentially be your concept? And then from there, pick the one that feels the most compelling, that brings the most inherent tension without having to bring in the character and the plot, which is what you're starting to do here. So I hope that gives you some ideas on how to brainstorm for that concept. So, good starting point, really good starting point. It's just that now you want to think about how can you really amp it up and make it more interesting. Because right off the bat, if you tell someone, oh, this out-of-work talent manager discovers the new sensation while on vacation. Okay, it might be interesting to some people, but there's nothing there that makes you super pumped up, like, I've got to see this, I've got to read this. You don't have that compelling, inherent tension and dramatic factor yet. But you can. It's just bringing that in there. So it's looking at all the different pieces and how can you make that more conceptual. Angela, and that's what I've been doing because I didn't understand that. Oh, exactly. Believe me when I say this, and I've been a story coach for a lot of years now, and that is the thing that I see most often with writers, is that they get this great idea and they run with it. So like I said, I did this. I did it my whole life up till this point, until I started learning what I needed to do differently. In 2008, when I wrote my first novel, was just blown away excited about it. I had this great idea. It was just something that I knew I had to write. This girl's gonna drop everything and move across the country and try to date her, soulmate musician guy. That was the idea I had, and I just thought that was a story, so I ran with it. But unfortunately, it's not, because what happens is, okay, well, maybe she sort of has a goal, which, she kind of did, I guess, who's gonna move over there and try to get this guy. But there was no antagonist to oppose it. There's nobody trying to stop her from doing that. So it was kind of just this episodic, she gets to California and then she tries to find the guy and then she meets him and then this happens and this happens and this happens. But there's really no end point, because there wasn't an actual journey to begin with. It was just an idea. And so when I finally realized that, and it took me several years after I wrote that story to finally really understand this, it changed everything for me, because finally I was able to see that, okay, I have this great idea, but now I have to take some time to work out what's conceptual about it and what makes it, a plot versus just an episodic narrative. So just messing with all of the pieces and just playing around with it. So the fact that you're here listening to this is going to help you just immensely with all of your stories from here on out, because if you can understand that when you get this idea, even if it feels great, like the greatest idea you've ever had in your life, you still want to look at it from the perspective of, is this going to become episodic? Am I just going to get the day-to-day occurrences of a character's life and that's it? And if you've seen the video series that I put out, so a lot of you came to this challenge through my video series, so if you did, I talked about opposition being that thing that changes the story from an episodic narrative into an actual story. And so that's the thing that you need to think about when you come up with your idea for a story is this going to become episodic, or do I have something here that's going to actually make it a real story because there's opposition and I have a concept and I've got, a plot and all these things. So, and if you haven't seen the video series, so if you're just popping in on this live stream right now and you want to check out the video series, jenniferblanchard.net/video series to get that. And then for the emails for the challenge, jenniferblanchard.net/story challenge. Heather, my concept is sort of autobiography about growing up as a writer in a broken family with little to no support, and how I published my first book and started to build my confidence to build my brand and platform. I'm finding a lot of teens don't want books that talk about structure or plot. They want to know how to be a writer when you don't have any support. Okay, so it sounds like you're talking about a nonfiction book. So you're talking about sharing your story of how you got to where you are today and the struggle you dealt with. That would definitely be nonfiction. So that wouldn't be anything you'd want to, you don't have to have concept for, you don't have to have fictional concept for a nonfiction book. So yeah, a nonfiction book has concept to it, but it's not the same thing as a concept for a fictional story. So if you're wanting to fictionalize what you're talking about here, so growing up in a broken family with little to no support, publishing your book, etc., well, keep in mind that this is just backstory. It's just, this is what happened to you up to this point. But now, what's the story? What's going to happen now that you're at this point? So that's another common error that I see writers make, is that they've got this big backstory that they've created for their characters or, their story, and they think that's the story. And so it's like, oh, I'm going to write this story about this character who went through all this traumatic stuff, and now they're going to do all these things. Well, okay, but all that traumatic stuff was just their backstory. And if it doesn't actually bring something to the table now, it's backstory. It's not an actual story. So the reader doesn't want to see your backstory. They want to see, how now you're here and where are you going to go from here. So really that's the idea. Now, if you're talking about writing a nonfiction book and teens don't want to talk about structure or plot, first off, I think that's probably a misconception, because I think most teens who want to write for real would love to learn about that. And especially, I'm thinking about myself when I was growing up, no one talked about structure. No one talked about that stuff in my classes that I took or any of the books I read. So I was completely confused about that for such a long time. And it wasn't until I found Larry that it finally made sense to me. So I always call him the gap filler, because until I found his books and his teachings, I always had these gaps in my understanding of how story works. And once I learned the stuff that he talks about, it filled in the gaps, especially structure, because that was one thing no one had ever talked about to me, or at least if they had, they never did it in a way that made sense, that made me actually remember it. So I think that it would be great to have a book for teens that talks about story structure and how to actually, figure out your story structure. So they want to know how to be a writer. Well, that's one of the biggest things of being a writer, is that you learn craft, and that you know and have an understanding of what it really takes to write a good story. Otherwise, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot, because then you're not ever going to get where you want to go, because you're not giving yourself the support that you actually need, which is understanding craft. And I always say this as kind of to be funny, but think about it this way. You want to be a great chef in a restaurant with a Michelin star and all this stuff. Would you really just roll out of bed one day and decide you're going to start cooking for a living? Probably not. You're going to learn recipes. You're going to figure out what the cooking techniques are. You're going to practice as much as you can. You're going to cook over and over again until your food is delicious. You're going to do all these craft related things that are required of you to become this Michelin star chef. You're not just going to roll out of bed and become a Michelin star chef overnight. It doesn't happen. So, and it's kind of funny. Same thing with a story. If you go to a restaurant and you eat a delicious meal, you're not going to go home and say, oh, I could recreate that, no big deal, and then recreate it exactly as you saw it. No, because what went into that dish that you ate was actually all of this craft and cooking and understanding cooking times and balancing flavors and all of these things that you don't realize is going into this plate. So a lot of the times writers will see a story that they read on their bookshelf, that they pick up at the store, and they go, oh, that's so easy, I can do that. And then they sit down and start writing. But it's actually not as easy as it looks. And the reason it looks so easy is because the person who wrote it has taken the time to learn craft and understand what it really takes to put a story together, and that they don't have an episodic narrative, that they actually have a concept, that they actually have a plot in place. So, just keep that in mind when it comes to that. That was a little bit of a tangent, but anyway, okay, Holly. This girl received a prophecy that gives her meaning and significance for the first time in her achievement-oriented family. She wants to fulfill this calling or bust. The culture environment she lives in is totally against her, with opposite values which have entangled her at times. Okay, so you have several things here that could be conceptual. So the first thing is this character conceptual? So is there something about her, you mentioned coming from an achievement-oriented family, well, is there something about her that makes her conceptual as a character? So does she have a superpower? Does she have some sort of a skill or a gift that nobody else has, or that, she needs to use because she's got it and it's unique or it's different? You mentioned prophecy. So sometimes a concept could be a prophecy in a story. So we talked about notion, which could fit that idea of a prophecy. So like you've got a belief in place, or you've got some sort of a bigger, thing at play. Well, maybe that's your concept. Or your culture environment, like you mentioned, well, what is the culture and the environment? Is there something about it that's going to give you a rich landscape to bring this story to life on? So looking at those pieces, because really what you've written here sounds like you're sort of moving into plot a little bit. And yeah, you haven't given like your antagonist and stuff like this, but I can sort of see from what you've got here, like potentially one of the people in your family could be the antagonist, or, somebody who is against the prophecy, or someone who doesn't believe, so you say they have opposite values. So I'm thinking like The Giver, if you've seen that movie or read that book, like this old man is giving this kid all of his memories and this world that used to exist that doesn't anymore. And so he's sort of becoming this person who is learning all these things that, the world isn't like that anymore where he is at. And so that actually becomes the landscape, is like that you've got this amazing world that used to exist and now it doesn't. And so this kid is knowing about this world and sort of just changing a lot of how he thinks about things and the way he believes and sees things, because now he's got this memory of all this stuff that used to be. So look at those things for your actual concept here, because I think you are probably dancing around it. It's just you want to sort of nail down the specifics of what is it that makes this story conceptual. Dennis, how do you incorporate backstory without it just overwhelming the novel? So backstory is always going to be, this is how I do backstory. So I come up with my story, I figure out my plot, I do all that stuff. And then I basically look at, okay, out of everything I have here, what backstory from my character is actually going to matter to make the rest of this information make sense, to connect it, to move the story forward. Now, the thing about backstory is that you as the author need to know all of it. You got to know every little piece of backstory there is to know about your character. However, your readers do not need to know all of that. So your readers, they need to know about 10% of that backstory, maybe less. So Larry calls it the iceberg principle, which is basically like above the surface, you see 10% of the iceberg, but then underneath the water is this huge piece of the iceberg that no one sees unless they're in the water. So that's the same thing with backstory, is that you want to know all of your backstory, so that's the stuff under the water, but you don't want to give it all into the story unless it's actually going to move the story forward, add information that's important for something happening in the story, or to just clarify something that we need to know about the character. So that way you're not just giving us backstory dumps, which is what happens a lot of times in stories, is that you'll see, and when I mean in stories, I'm talking about stories that haven't been published yet. So people writing stories, not actual published stories. It doesn't happen in there, because if it did, it wouldn't be published. So I'll see a lot of times, because I read a lot of manuscripts and things from writers, so one of the things I see is backstory dumps, where we basically get a chapter or a huge scene where we're just getting a ton of backstory about this character. Really stuff we don't need to know. So the way I like to look at it is each of my scenes, I look, okay, what backstory has to be here in order for this to make sense and to move the story forward? Maybe you don't need any. Maybe you just need 1 or 2 sentences. So really you just want to look at each piece of your story as you're developing it and ask yourself, does this backstory actually matter? Or is this just something that I need to know, but I don't have to tell everybody about it? So you sort of have to gauge this as you write the story and start to figure out more and more of what actually needs to be there to make sense. Because the whole thing is, You only need to tell the reader enough for it to make sense for them and for them not to be totally lost and confused. So if you can just give them that little bit of backstory, that's all they need, and then they're good. Yvonne, my idea is the story of a family living together in an apartment house. Parents, 4 siblings with their partners and kids. Everyone puts their nose in everything, looking for a conflict who puts them all together, and antagonist. Okay, so this is an idea, like you said. It's definitely an idea. I'm not seeing anything conceptual about this right now, so I would say, what is it that could be conceptual about this story? So it's not just about looking for conflict, because if you have a concept that's actually a concept, that will bring the conflict. It will bring the inherent tension and the drama. So as my example, the breakup coach, that in itself has drama and tension, because if you think about that, what is this person's job? Well, it's to help people break up with their significant others. Okay, well, the people who are doing the breaking up are okay, but what about the people who get dumped? They're going to be pissed off. They're going to be upset about this stuff. If they found out about what she was doing, they wouldn't be happy about it. They might try to come after her. They might try to hurt her or attack her or, who knows, kill her. We don't even know. It could be anything. So it brings the drama and the conflict and the tension just by being the concept. And that's not even bringing in the plot. That's not even bringing in the antagonist or any of that stuff. So with your idea here, think about that. Think about how can you bring something to the table that's now going to be conceptual for this family. So is it that everyone's in each other's business because one of them has a secret and it's a really big secret, or maybe they have some sort of a hidden talent or a skill or something, or maybe a superpower? I mean, it's all going to depend on the type of story you're writing. But of course, these are things to be thinking about and to sort of play with. Now, as far as your antagonist goes, we're going to be talking more about that tomorrow, so I'm going to sort of leave that one for now. But just sort of be thinking about what could oppose the character in the story. So you're going to have to pick one of those people in your story to be your protagonist. Maybe one of the parents or one of the siblings. I don't know. It's totally up to you. But you want one person to be your protagonist, and then they're going to have a goal of some kind, which you're going to then create an antagonist who has an opposite goal to now oppose them in the story and create the tension and the conflict and the drama. Yeah, I've tried interviewing several teen writers groups, and they don't care about that stuff yet. I originally wanted to write a teen story structure book, but they didn't seem interested. Maybe I can incorporate both into one book. Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, a lot of the teens aren't interested because they don't understand it yet. So they're probably just in developmental stages of their writing thing. Like, they're just not there yet. Like, they will be. It's just going to take time. Now, the other thing is there are probably a lot of teens who are proactive. But maybe they don't like the term structure, which I think happens a lot with writers, especially creative and younger writers, because you automatically take the word structure and you equivalate it or make it equivalent to formula, which it's not. And so a lot of the times you think, okay, well, if I have structure, then it's a formula and I'm basically paint by numbering my story. But that's not at all the case, because just even looking at concept like I was talking about. So I'm writing The Breakup Coach. On Netflix is a movie called The Matchbreaker. If I gave you the idea to go and write a story about a breakup coach, your story is going to be totally different than mine. It's going to be totally different than some other writer who writes the same thing. My story and The Matchbreaker are not the same story, but the concept is the same. So I think it's really just a terminology, and maybe they just haven't gotten to that place where they see that structure is not formula. So we have the same concept, but our stories are totally different. That's not formula. That's concept. That's structure. That's things that bring the story to life, but it's not a formula. It's not like paint by numbers. Oh, you have to do this, this, and this, and then, it's the same. It's not the same story. So I think it's probably just the wording, especially being young and kids, rebel. I don't want to write stuff that's going to be formulaic. I don't want structure. I just want to do my own thing. But it's fine. You want to think about these kids who are proactive, these kids who want to know this stuff. So like for me, when I was growing up, there really wasn't a lot of that. Or if there was, I didn't have access to it. I didn't know about it. The internet wasn't really a big thing when I was growing up. I sort of grew up in the very beginning of the internet age. So, it wasn't a big thing when I was a kid. But I was always interested in it. So I've sort of been on and off online for, a lot of my life. But back then I was taking classes. So when I was in, middle school, I was taking writing classes, and I was going to this, amazingly, I lived in a town where we had this great writing school that you could take classes at. And so I was always taking classes, learning how to do better stories. And so I think you just have to find the right teenagers, the right teenage writers who actually are interested in that. So going to a writer's group may not be enough. You may want to just try the idea with like maybe an online group, or maybe just if you feel called to write it, just frickin' write it. Put it out there on Amazon, because there are tons of people on Amazon who you can't reach through a writer's group or online, through a Facebook group, but that they're on Amazon looking for this stuff. So just to keep that in mind. I mean, maybe you don't need a book just on structure for a teen writer. Maybe it's going to cover everything about writing a story, including structure. So you're sort of giving them that, here's how to become a writer / here's the craft information that you need in order to actually make it a good story. So that's kind of off the topic of concept, but hopefully that helps you. Angela, do you suggest starting with smaller projects like a novella rather than tackling a full-length novel to get more practice faster? You could. I mean, you definitely could. So the thing that I like to do is just develop story ideas. So take, and you probably, if you're anything like me, you have multiple ideas for stories. So play with some of these ideas. Take them out of your head, put them on paper, ask the concept questions like we were talking about. What situation could come into play? What, time could be happening? What setting could be in place? Is this character conceptual by themselves? Is there something about them that makes them special or different? Just looking at all those little pieces for all the ideas that you have and just play with them. So for me, the practicing was less about writing the story, which maybe sounds like weird advice because I think a lot of people will tell you, just keep writing, just write stories, that's how you're going to learn. For me, that didn't work. And only because I did not like writing a full draft and then going, crap, this thing sucks, I have to write the whole thing again. I do not have the patience for that. So, and again, this is just me and my experience, but I do not have the patience to write a full draft and then not do anything with it. So if I'm going to write a full draft, it's because I'm going to turn it into something. So I didn't practice by writing stories. I practiced by developing ideas, by taking the ideas I had and trying to flesh them out into a story. So I've got, 4 or 5 story plans that I've done over the years that I never actually wrote because I just didn't feel like this is a good enough story. It's not planned properly, but it was a good practice for me to understand how to take this idea, turn it into a concept, turn it into a premise, create structure around it. So even though they didn't all work, it was a good way for me to practice. And then from there, I was able to go, okay, well now I've got an idea that actually is going to work as a story. And then that's the one that I finally wrote. But it's totally up to you. So if you want to tackle a shorter project, if that makes it feel easier to you, then do that completely. Just do whatever feels right to you. For me, I just don't like to do that. So I like to just develop the idea and mess around with the story plan, but I don't actually have to write it unless I feel like, yes, this is a great story, and now it's time to actually put the words down on paper. So for me, that was one of the best ways that I practiced over the years. Also, watching movies and deconstructing them. So actually watching the movie, breaking down the structure, figuring out the plot points, figuring out the character arc, figuring out what the concept is. Like just doing all of the pieces of craft from a story that already exists. And by doing that, helped me to really learn how to understand it, how to break it down, and how to explain it, which I think is super important for a writer to be able to do, is explain how they understand their story. Because if you can't do that, so if you somehow manage to be one of those writers who intuitively can write a story without knowing the specifics, which I would say someone who intuitively does, they still know it, it's just they can't explain it. So they'll write the story and they're like, the story is so great, I'm super excited, but then they don't know how to repeat it because they don't know what they did the first time. It just sort of happened. So I think that's actually a disadvantage, and that you're better off knowing the pieces and understanding what all the pieces are, because then you can replicate it over and over again versus just writing one great story and then falling off the face of the planet because you can't replicate what you just did. So that, I would say, it's really up to you, but I would start with taking a bunch of your ideas and just try to develop them and really just put a plan together without actually having to write the words yet. So I refuse to write anything until I have a story plan. That's just me, again, because I don't have patience to write more than one draft. So I write a draft. It's a good enough draft because I did the story planning and I spent the time on the story planning. So then when I go and revise, it's not about I have to fix the story. It's about, I'm just making things better. I'm improving it versus, now I got to go back and tear the whole thing apart because it doesn't have structure or it doesn't have a plot or whatever. So I would just recommend get a notebook or do it on your computer if you want, but I like to hand plan things and just write out a bunch of ideas, play with the concepts, come up with characters, and just see what happens. Rita, a young woman wakes from a vivid dream in which an old woman tells her that she comes from an ancient Druid family and she was given up to protect her. When she wakes up, she finds strange symbols marked on her skin, markings much like those on the woman's skin. Okay, so again, this is backstory. This is what happened to the character up to this point. Now, what's going to happen from here? So it sounds like because you've got this, the druid thing and the symbols on the skin, that you're probably going to have some sort of a fantasy world happening. So that could be your concept, is the world that you're creating where this person lives, where, you know, this stuff goes on, where strange symbols exist. And, you know, just thinking, or maybe it's her. So maybe what's conceptual is her. So maybe something about the symbols gives her a power, or gives her some sort of a skill set that no one else has, or, you know, whatever. So it's really just looking at all these pieces. But keep in mind that this is just, I mean, that's like a potential plot, but it's also just backstory. It's just, okay, she had a dream, she woke up, now she's got these marks on her. Okay, but so what? What now? Where do we go from here? That's what matters. That's where your story is where do we go from here? So think about that and really play with some ideas on the setting. I feel like for a lot of fantasy stories, the setting is going to be your concept. It's the landscape of the story. It's the thing that brings the story to life, is this world that they live in and the rules of that world. It's what becomes conceptual. Cynthia, I wrote nothing but backstory and thought I had a concept. So would this work as a concept? Teens in a magical kingdom are forcibly quarantined because the king claims they have an infectious disease and a young girl must infiltrate the camp to discover what's going on. Okay, so that right there is a plot. So you've just given us a plot. Now, it's not a full plot, but it's basically the start of a plot. You've given us an antagonist, so the king, his reason for doing what he's doing, because he believes these kids have an infectious disease. So that's his reason, his, you know, like a why, or his compelling motivation for why he's forcibly quarantining these kids. And now this girl has to go rescue them. So her goal is to save the kids. The king's goal is to keep them locked up. There's your opposition right there. And you've got yourself a plot. So your concept is going to be your magical kingdom. So think about it from this. Well, okay, what's magical about it? What makes this magical kingdom different than all the other magical kingdoms out there? What about it can you bring to the table that's going to make it more exciting and slightly more different, or slightly more interesting than, you know, some other stories that are about magical kingdoms? The other thing is, it could be your girl. So your character could be conceptual if there's something about her that makes her that way. And me and you have talked about this before, but just to keep that in mind is like, okay, you've got a basic plot here. So you're moving in the right direction, and we're going to talk more about plot tomorrow. But this is a really good starting point. So now you want to just look at what's conceptual about what you wrote there. So to me, what stands out is the magical kingdom and possibly this younger girl. So if this young girl thinks she can go infiltrate this king's camp and rescue these girls, well, clearly then she must have some skill set or something happening that makes her feel that she can do this. So what is it? Is that what's conceptual about it? Or is there an infectious disease? So maybe that's your concept, is that there's this infectious disease that's going to be the landscape of the story, and everything's going to come from there. So now you've got this plot happening off of, okay, this guy's quarantining these people and they've got this disease. Well, maybe that's part of your concept, is this disease, and play with that idea more and kind of mess around with it a little bit more. Angela, idea. Custom builder gets the chance from her boss to build her dream project, but discovers it's for the family that ruined her life. Again, plot. So right there you've got her boss gives her this project, but then she discovers that it's the family who ruined her life. So the family that ruined her life is your opposition. You've got your plot starting. Now this isn't a full plot, but it's a starting point. So what's conceptual about this? Is it the world she lives in? Is it some sort of a situation that she's going to be put in? Is it her as a character? You know, just really look at all this stuff. So that's the starting point of anything, is just whatever you have as your idea, and now write it down and then look at it from the perspective of, okay, what can I bring into this that's going to make it inherently dramatic and tension and conflict without knowing all this other stuff? So without knowing who the bad guy is and what the problem is in the story. So like I mentioned the breakup coach, and I'm sorry I keep using this example, but I feel like it's just a good example of what a concept is. So you get this idea of a breakup coach, right there you've got the tension, the drama, the conflict, but you don't have your bad guy, and you don't have your plot, and you don't know where we're going to go from here, but you just have this one little thing that becomes the building block for the rest of that stuff. So you've sort of got the next piece, which is your plot, starting to develop. So now it's going to be, okay, what concept would bring this plot to life? So what is it that could be happening that would make this even more, you know, dramatic and have more tension just by being in the story? Let's see. Oh, that's a repeat. Okay, I don't know, that comment repeated for some reason. I'm a bit confused what the difference between plot, concept, and idea. Sorry, I'm new here, but I'm learning a lot. Awesome. Yeah, no worries. That's what we're here for, is to talk about the differences. So I'm not going to get into plot too much because, like I said, that's going to be tomorrow. So I don't want to spend too much more time on this because I do have to cut the live stream off at 1 because I have a call with one of my clients. But we will get into plot tomorrow. So the difference between an idea and a concept. A concept is going to be a landscape for your story. So it's going to be the thing that brings the story to life. Now, an idea is just a spark. It's just something, and sometimes the thing with an idea is that sometimes it is a piece of a concept, or sometimes it's a piece of a plot, or sometimes it's a character arc, or sometimes so it's not always just, okay, this doesn't involve it at all. It's just that sometimes it's not enough. So in my example about the story that I wrote, in 2008, this girl, this was the idea, was that she has a dream, that she truly believes that this musician is her soulmate. She thinks he's her soulmate. She drops everything. She moves across the country to try to date him. That's just an idea. Because even though I've brought in some pieces, yeah, I do have a piece of a plot there. I do have a character. So it's an idea still, but it has pieces of a plot. It has pieces of a character. So that's really the difference, is that an idea isn't a full plot. It isn't a full concept. It's just a blip of something. It's a little bit of inspiration, but it's not a full story. Now, and I'm going to say this again tomorrow, but I'll just say it now because you're asking about plot. So a plot, at its very basic level, is this: a protagonist that wants something, an antagonist that opposes what the protagonist wants, and a journey that ensues because of it. That is a very general and basic definition of plot. So if you've got this idea, but it doesn't fit that definition, then you don't have a plot yet. You have an idea. So you can sort of look at the pieces of, okay, this doesn't fit plot yet because there's still stuff missing. I don't have an antagonist. I don't have an opposing goal yet. So these are things to look for and to start figuring out to turn this idea into a plot. Same thing with the concept. So what I gave you there, she drops everything, moves across the country to date this musician. Well, that's not a concept. That's an idea, and it's a starting point of a plot. But where's the concept? So in that case, I would say the concept would probably be the music industry. So we're going to get to go across the country and see what it's like to be in the music industry with this girl. We're going to be with this musician, and she's going to try to date him. But, we're seeing the sort of LA/music industry. That right there is the concept for the story. It's the setting. This is why I say that most of the time, concept is setting. Now, not always, but a lot of the times it is, because you get this piece that basically becomes your foundation for your story. And I should probably give you some more examples of concept to maybe clarify some of this. So let me do that right now before we cut this live stream off. And if anyone has additional questions, put them in the comments. I will answer as many questions as I can until 1, and then I have to go do my client call, but I will come back and check the comments later. So if you're watching the replay, or if you have additional questions, I will come back and check, and I will be sure to answer them in the comments as well. But just like I said, I've got about 10 minutes and then I have to wrap this up. So any additional questions or anything, put them in here, and I'm going to give you some more concept examples. So, and they're probably going to be ones you've heard of, hopefully. So movies that exist that are out right now. Okay, so Twilight, the whole series of Twilight, the concept is a vampire falls in love with a human girl. That's the concept. That's the concept across every single story. Now, of course, each story has its own plot and its own set of characters and all this stuff, but that's the concept of the story. A vampire falls in love with a human girl. That's your concept. If you're talking like, and I usually have a whole list. In fact, let me, I've got my computer right here. Let me pull up my little list of examples, because maybe that will be better. Yeah, like I said, just give me a second, guys. I've done a bunch of webinars on this stuff, so I've got a bunch of examples written down from the webinar slides, so I should just use those. Okay, so some more ideas. Or excuse me, some more concepts. And I'm losing track of what I'm talking about now. Concept examples. Oh yeah, I'm trying to find this. I have a whole list of examples, so I just thought it'd be easier to read it. But if I can't find it, then I'll just have to go off the top of my head. Let's see. Idea, concept, premise. All right, well, I can't find this doc right now, and I don't want to sit here and try to find it for you guys. So let me just try to give you some more that I can think of off the top of my head, and I'm hopefully going to be able to come up with some. Okay, let's see, some other stories. So what are some other? Oh, okay, here's one. Something's Got to Give. So if you've ever seen that movie, that is a movie about a woman, older people who basically are learning to love for the first time. So the concept of that story, Something's Got to Give, the concept of that story is very simple. Falling in love in your 50s. That's it. That's the concept of the entire story. That's what we see unfold in the entire story, is falling in love in your 50s. That's it. That's the foundation of the rest of the story. And then what we see is now we've got this character who has this guy who she can't stand, but he's like a womanizer, and he's all the things she hates about guys. And now he's in her life because he had a heart attack in her house, and now he has to stay there for a couple of weeks while he gets better. And so then they end up falling in love, but then, oh wait, he's still a womanizer, so he decides he can't be with her, and they break up, and but they end up falling in love at the end. So it's like showing us this journey that she goes through, falling in love for the first time in her 50s. So that becomes your concept. It's falling in love in your 50s. Let's see, Sons of Anarchy. So if you want to talk about that TV show, the concept there is the club Sons of Anarchy. So it's this group of people and, their whole motorcycle club. So it's all the stuff that involves their motorcycle club. That's the concept. So every single episode, we've got this motorcycle club, and then we're seeing all the things that they're doing. And then, of course, we've got each story has its own little plot. So we've got antagonists that they deal with and people that they have to defeat or take down, and all this stuff that happens for them. But the concept is just the motorcycle club. It's the Sons of Anarchy motorcycle club. So that is your concept. That's the starting point for your whole story. And then you build on it with your plot, with each of the different stories. Trying to think of some other ones off the top of my head, which I'm not so great because my memory kind of sucks sometimes. So I'm just trying to think of some other examples that I talk about sometimes. Those are some big ones that I talk about a lot. Let's see. Billy Madison. So I talk about that one a lot. I talked about that in the video series. So if you watch the video series, you saw me talk about the opposition in that story. Well, that story, the concept is going back to school, going back to, grade school as an adult. So that's something conceptual because most people are never going to get to do that. Most people are never going to experience being a grown adult and going back to first grade and then second grade and third grade and fourth grade. So that's your landscape for your story, is this guy is an adult, grown up adult, and goes back to school to regraduate. And that's the concept. So the story is unfolding as he goes back to school and all the stuff that happens as he does that. Now, of course, there's a bad guy. There's an actual plot. So again, a mistake, which we talked about earlier, a mistake that writers make is they get this great idea. Oh, I'm going to write a story about this guy who goes back to school as an adult. Okay, well, there's your concept. You've got a good concept, but you don't have a story yet. So it would be a mistake to now take this concept and run with it. It would be a mistake to go and write a story where this guy goes back to school and has to go back to school. Well, okay, but what's interesting about that? What's conflicted about that? What's, where's your antagonist? Where's your opposition? So that's not a story. It's a concept. It's a starting point. And then you build in, okay, here's my bad guy. He's going to have to win back the company from this guy who's going to try to take it from him. And now we've got an actual story happening on this landscape of going back to school as an adult. Went off. Letting me know I have 5 minutes before my call. So anyway, I hope this gives you a good idea of what a concept is. And I know it is one of the most confusing pieces of craft. And believe me, for me, it was 5 years of practicing, studying, asking questions, looking at stories, watching movies before I could actually understand this at the foundational level that I get it at now. Something else that helped me with this, and it's another book, Larry Brooks, Story Fix. So he has a book called Story Fix. It's the third in his series. This one is all about revising your story, but this one goes so much deeper into concept and premise. And it's really the thing that helped me finally understand the difference between a concept and a premise and understanding how it differs from an idea. So Story Fix, if you haven't read it yet, check that one out because that one helped me a ton. But it's really just look at the story. So look at movies that are out there and ask yourself, what's conceptual about this? What's the landscape? And look at that list that I gave you. So what's the landscape? Or is there a setting that's conceptual? Or is it the character? So each time you're just looking at all these pieces and trying to figure it out. It doesn't mean you have to be right. So that's the thing with practicing. I think a lot of times we tell ourselves if we can't get it the first time, then we shouldn't bother. That was for me for a very long time. I struggled with trying to figure out structure in a movie. So I would watch movies and I would watch the movie and recognize like, yeah, there's structure going on, but I couldn't point out the plot points. It was like, I can't tell you what they are. And so the problem was that I just wasn't able to, articulate it. However, it was all still there. And so I kept telling myself, if I just keep watching movies, eventually I'll get it. And Larry would tell me that too. He's like, watch more movies. I promise you one day the plot points are going to jump off the screen and smack you in the forehead. And he used to always tell me that, and I would laugh and be like, yeah, sure, okay. But it's true, it actually happened. So now, when I watch a movie, boom, 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 the plot points just stand out to me. But it didn't happen overnight. It took me years of watching movies and trying to figure out the plot points. So don't just mess with concept one time and then not keep going. Like with concept, you want to just keep practicing, keep looking at it, keep refining it. All right, guys, I'm going to have to wrap this up. I see some more comments. I'm going to come back after, and I will make comments on here for you. Yvonne, you can find the list. If you want to sign up for the emails, I sent the list in the emails. So if you go to jenniferblanchard.net/story-challenge, you can sign up for the emails. So you'll get the first email, which is all about concept, and there's a list in there of what a concept can be. I also mentioned the list on here, so I went through and verbally read it. So if you watch the replay, you'll be able to see it again. If anyone has additional questions or anything like that, put them in the comments. I will come back after my call with my client and I will answer them. If you're watching this as a replay, same thing. And if you are loving this and you want more from this challenge, if you're not already signed up for the emails, like I said, jenniferblanchard.net/story-challenge. And if you're ready to go even deeper and you want to just hit the ground running with your story idea and develop it into a full story plan and write it during National Novel Writing Month this year, which is happening in November, be sure to check out my workshop that's starting September 11th. So we're in early bird phase right now. So if you sign up this week, by Friday, you get $100 off the full price. You can go to jenniferblanchard.net/nano edition, so NANO edition, to check that out. I'll be telling you much more about that as the week goes on. But just right now, if you are interested in being part of that workshop, you can check it out there, jenniferblanchard.net/nano edition. I will see you guys tomorrow at noon Central Time for the next segment of our challenge, and I will catch you next time.